Hello and welcome to the Stiles Council podcast. Me and Chris Nee are speaking every couple of weeks about the international game and England in particular, proving just how in touch we are with football hipsterism still. Basically, we sort of split the podcast into three sections, and the first section is one that we have decided to call The News. Interesting. Chris, by way of introduction, I'm going to go straight into it because there's a little bit of ground to cover. Initial reactions to the UEFA Nations League draw, which sees England in Group A4 with Spain and Croatia.
To be honest, Dave, who we play against is not of great consequence to me. I'm sort of interested in the whole process, but I'm more bothered by the fact that we'll have some relatively competitive games than in who it is in particular. Because I think England's friendlies tend to be against fairly decent opposition anyway. So it adds a little bit of spice to that. But we haven't drawn Germany or France, but we've played them both relatively recently anyway. So I welcome the games and I'm intrigued by the competition. But any of the teams that got pulled out of League A, I'd have been, relatively happy about. I'm looking forward to the matches, but to be honest, they could have been against anybody who's in that league.
Yeah, I think we are both pretty much on the same page with the Nations League, which is that while we're not sort of drum-beatingly positive about it, I think we both think it's reasonably refreshing to see something other than a parade of friendlies, don't we?
Yeah, I don't dislike friendlies at all, and largely for the reason that when we play friendlies, it's not often we invite San Marino over for a kickabout, is it? We tend to pick games that will have a bit of a challenge to them anyway, and actually those were the reasons for my early scepticism about the Nations League anyway. So I'm largely kind of keeping my powder dry on this one, which is not something you'll often hear me say about a football thing. I'm really genuinely happy enough to see how it plays out.
I think I'm a shade more positive than that. I love international football, and the one thing the Nations League has done, as we look at it as a whole, so we are an England podcast, but I think it's worth looking at it as a whole. There are some, to be frank, terrific games coming up. Group A1, Germany, France and the Netherlands. And that should be enough to get anybody interested. But Group A2, Belgium, Switzerland and Iceland is a funny little group. Belgium should have no real problems there, but it is Belgium, isn't it, Chris?
It is. They are very capable of creating problems all of their own. And as we know, both Switzerland and Iceland are capable of causing problems for teams better than Belgium. So
yeah, and it's. I mean, however competitive you think it's going to be, I think we're both in agreement that Iceland are going to take that very seriously, aren't they?
Yeah, and you don't know Belgium at full strength can be caught out, but Belgium having it as their second priority, above friendlies but below standard qualifying, they're very capable of getting themselves a bloody nose, I think. So I think having three teams per group makes things very interesting.
Yeah.
Because we're not used to these small groups, particularly with relegation at the end of them.
No, this is the thing. This is what I think makes it quite refreshing, and I think a lot of the initial scepticism is because people like to be sceptical. I think if you just embrace it,
sign me up. A3, that's where I come from, which is why I'm not quite going all guns blazing.
But it could be a spectacular failure, but it could be an awful lot of fun as well. Group A3 gives us Portugal, Italy, and Poland, and they should be a pretty attractive set of games. And then, if you look at the B tier, Group B2, Russia, Sweden, and Turkey. Well, that's certainly worth watching, in my humble opinion. Northern Ireland have got they've got a really good chance with Austria and Bosnia-Herzegovina in there. They've got a good chance of doing something. B4, Wales, Republic of Ireland and Denmark. Republic of Ireland have got to be looking at that group, and they've got to be worried about that, haven't they?
Bit of recent history in that group as well.
Yeah. So then, as I said, I'm not going to do every single group, but I can make a case that there's at least one game I'm interested in every single tier, right down to Group D4, and I think that's a good thing for international football. And whether it works out or not, I don't know. Whether it becomes a spectacular failure, whether the journalists leap on top of it and continuously tell us how rubbish it is, and it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I don't know, but I honestly think it's quite exciting.
Yeah, there's good things about it. I think I will do UEFA more credit than they deserve and make the leap that it's not really about England and Germany, but it's about the fact that League D will see Kazakhstan play Andorra and San Marino play Luxembourg, and it will see Liechtenstein be, first or second favourites maybe. Macedonia would probably have a complaint about that in their group, but I think Liechtenstein have a chance of bumping up a league. And those games, these are the games that people wanted to achieve by pre-qualifying. And that's a real positive. Those games happening in a way that doesn't involve a pre-qualifying in that kind of name, I think works very well, hopefully.
And let's be honest, Liechtenstein, Gibraltar, San Marino, Luxembourg, Faroes, a little bit of actually competitive football is going to go a long way for them. Yeah. A long, long way. And it's these smaller countries, like Scotland, that are going to get the most benefit from it. But anyway, Nations League covered. As I said, I think it's quite exciting, but I'm quite prepared for that to blow up in my face. We move on to the discussion section of the podcast, and it's a big question, this, Chris. It's a big question.
Isn't it?
How can we harness the first St George's Park generation correctly? And yeah, I have thoughts and feelings, Chris, but I'm going to let you go first.
Are we in loose agreement that there is a first George's Park generation?
Yeah, I am. Yeah,
I think a certain trophy cabinet would back that up from the summer. So hopefully there's some effect, and hopefully there's some causality between the two things as well. How we can harness that from the point of view of the first team it's a huge challenge, and I think that both of us will oversimplify it to an extraordinary degree here, but that's what we're here for. So I think there are obvious things for starters. I think making sure that we continue to coach them well at international level is really important, and I also think that making sure, as far as possible, that they get the appropriate opportunities to progress, by which I mean appropriate, not just lots. Progressing to the senior side, that's really important. But now that we have something to get our teeth into, now that there's some reason for me not to just say, we'll bugger it all up because there's no generation coming through anyway, I'm starting to shift a few of my opinions around a little bit on how we treat those players and how we treat the England side. So increasingly I'm more and more in favour of treating England as a club side in some aspects. And that's something the Football Association has talked about a lot in the past, or at least had as part of its corporate terminology in the past. But the reality is there are so many foreign players in the top flight that we need to be enlightened about the expectations we have about how much young English players are actually going to play in the top flight. So years ago, I would have been very much opposed to players who aren't playing regularly for their club sides being regulars for England. More so now, I'm thinking that if you come through the ranks with England, if you come out of that under-17 side and play for the 18s, 19s, 20s, and then into the 21s and into the first team, you are part of the England football club. And as far as I'm concerned at that point, you're on the ladder. and you're judged on your England form. And I think there's probably some controversy in that view. And it's certainly something that I myself would have disagreed with in the past. But I just don't think it's a realistic expectation for English players, teenagers in particular, to overcome the barrier of the competition for places that they have in the Premier League. And I think to ignore that would be to our detriment as a national team. It's on the players as well. I think I also want English players to make smarter career decisions. And there's a bit of evidence starting to happen that those are happening. The English players going over to the Bundesliga at the moment is particularly exciting to me because they're going over there to play football at a high level.
Yeah.
And the cultural expansion that comes with that and the different styles of play they'll learn and the different approaches to the game they'll learn can only be for the good of their careers. And if it's good for that, it's good for us as well. So there's a balance to be found between managing them and letting them manage themselves. But I think there's something in, not expecting England players to be playing in the Premier League every week. I think we need to make sure that club level coaching is up to scratch. That's a very long-term aim, and that's also centred squarely on St George's Park. But I think we need to make sure that the coaching matches the quality of the generation that's been brought through by the England coaches at under 17 level and above.
Yeah, I think you make some excellent points. I think that one of the things I keep coming back to is one of the words you used in the very first sentence you spoke, Chris, which is opportunity. Because we are recording this the day after the transfer window slammed shut.
It was noisy, wasn't it?
And we watched Man City lose Leroy Sané and basically try and get Riyad Mahrez in to replace him. Now, I know City fans are going to go, but Phil Foden's injured, etc., etc. I understand all that, but that is, and I'm not picking on City here. Chelsea would do the same. Manchester United would do the same. Liverpool and Arsenal probably not, but that's only because they haven't got the same level of money rather than any other reason. And that tells you where we are at the moment in terms of young English players at the top sides. They really have to have. There has to be either a major crisis, as there was at Manchester United, that allowed Marcus Rashford to come through, because that was how he got his opportunity, which is a sad thing to say, really, but at the same time, the way he took that opportunity was exceptional. But you can't rely on that as a young player. So you look at someone like Jordan Sancho, who's gone over to Dortmund, and I'm just so full of admiration for somebody who wants to roll the dice. They want to play football. They've got a chance to play in a top division in a different country, rather than going into the Championship for a stodgy loan spell where they're playing 3 games a week and getting kicked to high heaven. And I just think it's a really positive step. And I hope that Oxford, Sancho, Lookman are all absolute massive successes, because I would like to see 10 of our players go over there, 20 of our players go over there, 25 of them, because I don't think it's not just that I don't think the opportunities are there in the Premier League anymore. I'm not even sure the Premier League is the right place for those opportunities as things stand, because there's 2 leagues within the Premier League. There's the very top that exists almost on a different plateau to football itself. And then everybody else below is much of a muchness, and it takes an awful lot to stand out. So the opportunities is a huge thing. And I just want to see players who are hungry to take them. But the other thing you said, Chris, about coaching, I think is absolutely massive. Because the barriers that are in place to coaching in this country, in terms of very simple things like finance, it should be... I understand you have to pay to go on a coaching course, but it should be a level where, put it this way, nobody should be having to take a bank loan out to become to become a licensed coach. And at the moment in England, that's a very real situation. And that to me is just absolutely staggering. And then these people, they get they get a license, they've never coached before. So the first thing we do is stick them in charge of the kids.
Mm.
So we take the youngest, most inexperienced and raw coaches who still need to learn their trade, and we put them with the most important group of people at a football club. And that, it staggers me. I've never been able to get my head around that at all. So I think there's culturally something in our coaching mindset that has to change, and physically the FA have to look at this and they have to subsidise it. They have to find ways to A, fast track coaching courses, B, get more and more black candidates into the positions where, because we've lost. I mean, the Rooney Rule is I think we'd both agree it's a very positive step, Chris.
Absolutely.
But it absolutely breaks my heart when I think about the level of coaching and the amount of coaches we will have lost at this point. And it staggers me. But I come back, the question we often ask ourselves are the FA fit for purpose, Chris? And if they don't get these things right, if they don't, it's a good thing to put the Rooney Rule in, but if they don't go all the way with it, if they don't treat the Rooney Rule as a start rather than a solution, again, we're going to be asking questions. But if you were there right now, Chris, and you're in charge of, say you're in charge of the under 21s, not the manager of the under 21s, but you're in charge of England under 21s as an entire entity. What would you be telling telling your coaches, and B, what message would you want passed on to these kids as things stand right this moment?
I want coaches and players, and the message that goes in between the two of them, to be about broadening horizons, learning the game, learning different ways of playing the game, different nutritional advice, different cultural advice, job advice, and for young English players to be able to absorb a wealth of knowledge and intelligence. Because we, as a nation, we're horrific for taking the piss out of footballers for being stupid. They are not stupid. Having worked in PR in the past, I know how difficult it is to media train an idiot. And the way some of the footballers have been media trained really suggests to me that they're able to take on information in a way that we don't credit them with enough. But the real point is that they're not stupid. And if we can open their eyes up a little bit, they will learn. But I think, to be honest, the main messages I would want to give to coaches, by 21, it's too late. By 21, I don't feel like it's useful to tell coaches how to coach the players. They're done at that point. I want them to have spent 15 years with a ball at their feet by that point.
Yeah, I get that.
Dave, before you move on, we talked about opportunity. Did you see, I think it was Daniel Taylor at the end of last year, who I think we can agree is the finest football writer of the name Daniel. I'll see if he's listening.
Yeah.
I think it was him who wrote a piece which was kind of headlined around Foden, and the comparison that was being made was that the opportunities for him to play first team football for Manchester City was something that he was keen to temper in his audience, because the expectation that he would come back from these tournaments and suddenly become a first team player at Manchester City is clearly pie in the sky. And the comparison that was made was with Manchester United, who, of course, historically, in fact, I think every single game for 80 odd years, have had teams featuring at least one product of their academy or whatever system they had in place at the time. And the author was musing about, firstly, under Jose Mourinho, is that going to change? And actually, the conclusion was probably not, despite Mourinho's historical kind of disconnection with youth systems at clubs he's been at. But also whether Manchester United might take a step to actually enshrine that in a more official way in something that he coined as the United rule. And it kind of got me thinking, because I'm certain this isn't something that could feasibly be mandated at league or FA level. But if it was enshrined at somewhere like Manchester United and more clubs followed, then I think it's a good thing for them as clubs, not just for England. I think there's something in it. You know, there's a community and cultural connection between young local players, and I think the local part is really important here, because you can obviously bring through academy players that aren't necessarily local in the same way. But if you can do that, I think it's good for the soul of the football club. And I think a football club with a soul is a far more saleable asset and a far more attractive proposition for TV and all of the stuff that is really important to these people. And it's good for the young players and it's good for England. So I think if we could find a way of kind of culturally selling that idea into the clubs, then we might be onto something. That's completely unrealistic, I think. But it makes me wonder what role the clubs have in terms of the England team. You know, we assume nothing nowadays. I think that's letting them off the hook, myself.
Yeah, I do. I mean, if it was down to us, things would be very different, Chris.
Yes, that is true.
as we know. But I think there has to be a universality of approach between the youth levels, and I think we now have that at St George's Park. There is some joined up thinking. I don't ever think you're going to get a connection with the clubs that, say, someone like Bobby Robson, as England manager, used to be able to engineer. He had a very good relationship with lots and lots of people. And I do blame the FA for that, because the FA they've cut their nose off to spite their face a couple of times, but also they've allowed situations to develop which have meant this is the case. So it's very difficult to have any sympathy with them.
Yeah, well, of course, the very formation of the Premier League is on the FA's head.
But I think the point, to come back to the question, because we've got to move on, but I think to come back to the question, how do we harness them? It comes back to the same thing, by getting them to play football, by getting them places where there is the opportunity to play football. And players who are doing it off their own back, like Sancho and like Lookman, who, if we believe what Sam Allardyce is telling us, virtually forced through that loan move himself. Excellent.
Yeah, by the way,
absolutely excellent.
On another podcast that we do, we give a lot of stick to RB Leipzig. But one thing that we've always agreed on, Dave, is that system is a very, very interesting place for a young player to be. Yeah.
And the thing is, obviously, Burke went over there, who's now at the Scottish lad who's now at West Brom. Yeah. And it didn't work out for him, and they were very, very quick to move on that. And I find that even more interesting, because they are looking at players not just from an ability point of view. They are looking at players from a development point of view. So if somebody like Lookman goes and thrives there for a couple of months and they're interested in the summer, that creates a very interesting situation for me, because obviously I may not like the model, but they've clearly identified that this is a player they can work with and mould and improve, and who is tactically savvy. And suddenly, as England fans, you go, oh, hang on, that's exactly what we want. So yeah, interesting. Anyway, we must move on, and the final section is the player wall. Still metaphorical at the moment. It will become physical at some point.
Yes, it will.
Last time out, It was our very first entry, and of course I put Paul Gascoigne up there because I am a parody of myself, if nothing else. So this week, Chris, it's your turn, and it's another biggie in my view.
Yeah, it is. I didn't want to just go for cast iron favourites to start with, because we're not doing a list of our favourite England players here. There are going to be stories in here and people that are in there for bad as well as good, I think. So as much as it would have been easy for me to just lean on England's greatest ever player, who we all know is Darius Vassell, I've gone for a player who I think has a claim, certainly in his position, if not on a wider basis, to be a kind of England great, and yet is underappreciated, and is having a bit of an Indian summer in terms of public affection at the moment, and that's Gary Neville, who played 85 times for England, and as a one-club man, that's something I've got a lot of time for as well. And it was only really having looked back through it. So, the 90s, Dave, that was our that was our period for England, I think, you and I. And he came into the side midway through that and just nailed down that right-back spot. And I don't think we've had better since, even fleetingly. And actually, as far back as I can remember, really, we didn't have better before either. And he did a lot with England. He played 3 Euros, he played 2 World Cups, and nobody has played more matches for England in European Championships finals. So
no, the thing about Gary Neville in an England shirt as well, never less than 7 out of 10.
No.
It never had a bad game. Now, he's underrated because I think he was a fullback sort of 5 years before fullbacks became pretty much the sexiest thing in football, really.
Yeah.
But the work he used to get through to facilitate others in that England team, and we both know who I'm talking about up top, who was another great worker in front of him, but that relationship that him and Beckham had, that they took from club into country, was excellent, because while Beckham was a worker, Neville did a lot of the hod carrying for him to allow him to push on and get himself into position to make a difference. And I'm a huge fan, Chris. Yeah, huge fan.
I assume he's our most capped right back. He must be, right?
Oh, it has to be. And I would have thought, I mean, I'm saying this completely blind, so I'm prepared for it to blow up in my face. I would have thought, Chris, it's not even close.
No, I'm very much of the same view. I can't think of anyone, certainly in my lifetime, who's even come close. Because it would have been, we've had Lee Dixon, Rob Jones.
Yeah, that England's defence between about 1982 and about 1995 really was a very movable feast.
It was.
So really, there'll have been no one until people like Neville, and latterly Cole and Rio, John Terry, really sort of nailed down those places in the first team, and Sol Campbell, etc. So I'd be surprised if he's not double or more.
Yeah,
his nearest
I think he will be. Paul Parker, of course, was one that just probably slightly too early for me to really remember loads of him in an England shirt. Neville's the best I've seen for England as a right back, without a shadow of a doubt.
And it was that phenomenal consistency, and I think that is what I will. I've had this conversation with a friend about Gary Neville, where he was very easy to dislike in a Man United shirt, but he was really easy to love in an England shirt. And it's quite rare to get a player that you can literally switch off your feelings for internationally.
Yeah,
because often if you don't like someone, like say just picking a name out of the sky, I don't know, let's use John Terry for example. If you were of the persuasion that you didn't particularly like him as a person, it's very difficult in an England shirt just to switch that off. But with Gary Neville, I never had that. I always loved him.
Yeah,
always loved him.
Nice example, Dave.
Well, I'm just pulling a name from thin air. I couldn't think of anyone else.
Yeah, imagine him then playing for your club. as captain and being very good at it. Ugh.
Yeah, it's going to be a tough statue to walk by that at Villa Park, isn't it?
Anyway, Neville's game, I think, is quite an interesting study as well, because he, for me, although he was a decent attacking presence, and when I think of the typical Manchester United at 1-0 down in the late 90s, all hands to the pump attacking style with 5 minutes to go, the signifier that told me they were 100% at it and going to equalise or going to score a late winner was the fact that Neville was camped in the final third, and they were pushed up that high, and that was the sign that they meant business at that point. But he was a very, very high quality defender, very consistent, and to me, Dave, and I'm willing to be contradicted on this, he was a specialist fullback, and it wasn't just time that stopped him being the modern day sexy fullback. He also was of his time in that he wasn't that sexy fullback. He did the full flank job, but he only really did the flying wing back thing when he was being played as a wing back, didn't he?
So when England it was Euro '96. It was the Scotland game, wasn't it? When they changed it at half time, brought Jamie Redknapp
yes, it was.
on, pushed Neville up, and it was Redknapp fed Neville, and he was charging on, and he crossed for Shearer to get that first goal, didn't he?
Yes.
And I think I know exactly what you're getting at. I think what you've got with Gary Neville is somebody who absolutely maximised the talent he had. He wasn't extraordinary, and he wasn't, Ashley Cole on the other side, I would argue, was far more talented footballer naturally, but Gary Neville really did make the very most of everything he had, and his work ethic was second to none. And yeah, I'm glad you've gone for him, because I would have gone for him early as well in this little project. Yeah,
deserves a word, doesn't he? And as I say, enjoying a second win now, and is becoming respected as a student of the game. And hopefully, looking back over his performances in an England shirt, you can see how that kind of came to pass on the football pitch as well.
Yeah, next week we're going to induct Phil Neville.
Yeah, yes, let's do that.
Not really. Yeah, it wasn't his fault he kept getting picked for England. Right. Thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it. Chris, where can you find the Stiles Council?
You can find the two of us on Twitter. I'm Chris M. Nee, and Dave is at David Hartrick. And you can follow Sphinx FTBL on Twitter and Facebook for this podcast and a couple of other podcast bits, and hopefully some exciting bits and bobs in the future as well.
Excellent. We shall speak soon.
Cheerio.